The morning of January 21st, 2008 began the same way most winter mornings did in lower Manhattan. A dull gray light slipping through the cracks between buildings, cold air drifting along the sidewalks, and the slow hum of the city waking itself up. In his SoHo loft, Heath Ledger moved from room to room with the kind of quiet determination that suggested he was trying to outrun exhaustion. He had barely slept, though this was not unusual in the weeks leading up to that day. Friends later said he had been battling insomnia so severe that no combination of medication seemed to bring relief. His mind, sharp and creative, refused to turn off. The Joker role he had completed months earlier still lingered in his imagination, its chaotic energy bleeding into his nights. Some described him as wired. Others said he was simply tired. But nearly everyone noticed the same thing. He was pushing himself harder than ever before. Heath spent the early hours flipping through a worn notebook filled with scribbles. Ideas, accents, fragments of audio notes he wanted to record. On the kitchen counter sat a reel-to-reel tape recorder he had been using to experiment with vocal exercises. The machine was off, but the tape inside it was partially wound, as though it had been used earlier that morning. Around 10 a.m., he stepped outside briefly to pick up a package from the lobby. The building's security camera captured him entering the elevator, shoulders hunched, scarf wrapped tightly around his neck. Just before the doors closed, he turned around, almost as if he sensed someone behind him, but the hallway was empty. By midday, he had returned to work on his lines for an upcoming project. His apartment was scattered with scripts, pages marked with handwritten notes and circled phrases. He rehearsed aloud, pacing across the living room, pausing occasionally to write something down. His voice sounded calm but distant, as though he were speaking from somewhere far inside himself. Around 1:30 p.m., a friend dropped by. She later described Heath as gentle, warm, but frayed at the edges. They talked about work, Australia, and his daughter. There was laughter, but beneath it an undercurrent of fatigue. When she left, she later said she felt something she could not name, a subtle heaviness in the room as though it were holding its breath. At 3 p.m., Heath retreated to his bedroom and attempted to sleep. The building's maintenance staff reported hearing him coughing, a deep, rough cough that had persisted for weeks. In interviews to follow, they said it sounded like a cold he couldn't shake, or something that lived deeper than his lungs. He tried a combination of prescribed medications to calm himself, but sleep still wouldn't come. He sat on the edge of his bed with the tape recorder beside him. No one knows exactly what he recorded that afternoon, but investigators later found the machine's tape counter stopped at a time that did not match any saved audio file. Somewhere between 5 and 6 p.m., he called his mother in Australia. The call was brief but affectionate. He told her he was tired and needed rest. She told him to take care of himself, a phrase she had said thousands of times before. But on that night, it carried a strange, emotional weight neither of them could explain. As daylight faded, the loft grew quiet. The city outside buzzed with evening energy, but inside the walls of his apartment, everything felt muted. Heath made tea, wrapped himself in a sweater, and settled at the foot of his bed. He watched clips from documentaries on his laptop, something he often did to calm his mind. Around 7:20 p.m., the housekeeper arrived to tidy up. She found Heath sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at a small digital recorder he often used for vocal notes. It was switched on, its red light blinking faintly. She asked if he needed anything. He smiled softly and said he was fine, though his eyes looked unfocused, as if part of him were somewhere else entirely. At 8 p.m., he received a phone call, a short one, barely 2 minutes. The caller was a colleague, checking in about the next day's shoot. Everything about the call seemed ordinary except for one detail. At one point, the colleague heard a faint click sound on the line, like someone else had picked up a receiver. But Heath was alone in the apartment. Heath ended the call calmly, then lay back on the bed. The housekeeper said goodnight and left the room. When she passed the living room, she noticed the reel-to-reel recorder still sitting in the table, its tape slightly unwound. She thought about mentioning it, but decided he must have been using it earlier. At 9:30 p.m., the building's elevator camera picked up a strange moment. A faint static flickered across the video feed for just under a second. No one else in the building reported any electrical issues, but that static would later become important. Inside his apartment, Heath made one last attempt to sleep. He dimmed the lights, turned on a white noise machine, and closed his eyes. The housekeeper later reported hearing him shift in bed, talking faintly in his sleep, or perhaps talking to himself. She couldn't tell which. Just after 10:30 p.m., the lights around his doorframe flickered. The building maintenance team later denied any outages. Not long afterward, the housekeeper heard a sound she couldn't explain. Something like a brief recording playback. A quick burst of muffled audio, then silence. She assumed he was using the tape recorder again. What she didn't know was that around this time, a time-stamped internal log showed that a small audio file was created on a separate device in his room, a recording the police would later list as corrupted and ultimately removed from the case files. At 11:08 p.m., for reasons unknown, Heath whispered something aloud. No one was there to hear it, but investigators later found a single line scribbled on a notepad beside his bed. It read, "Why is it louder when it's quiet?" Minutes later, he lay still. Hours after that, the recording would surface. A recording that should never have existed. A recording the official timeline could not account for. A recording known now as the lost tape. The official version of Heath Ledger's final night was constructed with remarkable speed. By the time the news reached the world on January 22nd, 2008, the narrative had already begun to harden. A tragic accident, a young actor exhausted from work, a fatal mixture of prescribed medications, clean, contained, uncomplicated, but inside the walls of his SoHo loft in the corridors of the building. That night, the hours unfolded in ways the official reports could never fully resolve. The timeline, meant to anchor everything in certainty, instead became the first sign that something about the case refused to stay still. According to the police summary, Heath was last seen alive shortly after 10:30 p.m. when the housekeeper checked on him and found him lying in bed, still awake but subdued. She claimed he told her he was going to try to sleep. The room was dim, the curtains drawn against the Manhattan glow. Nothing seemed out of place. She left him to rest, but multiple details conflict with this simple scene. At 10:37 p.m., an internal maintenance log from the building's electrical system detected a brief voltage fluctuation, anomalous and localized specifically to the 4th floor where Heath lived. It lasted less than a second, but the maintenance team later confirmed that no other apartment on that floor reported any outage or flicker. Only Ledger's camera hallway showed a glitch in the CCTV feed at the exact same moment. This moment never appeared in the official file. Shortly after 11 p.m., neighbors claimed they heard a muffled thump, followed by a soft dragging sound, something shifting across a floor. They assumed it was furniture being moved, perhaps for late-night cleaning. The noise lasted less than a minute and then stopped. When interviewed later, one neighbor described the sound as like someone setting something heavy down and sliding it briefly. But those statements were omitted from the final report because investigators could not determine whether the sounds came from Ledger's loft or the unit next door. The next pivotal moment in the official story occurred just after midnight. According to the housekeeper, she passed by Ledger's door again at approximately 12:15 a.m. She said she listened for movement and thought she heard him breathing heavily, as though in deep sleep. But when pressed on this detail, she later admitted she wasn't entirely sure if the sound came from behind the door or from the hallway vents. Investigators did not probe further. What the police accepted as fact is that by the early hours of the morning, Ledger was already unresponsive. But the exact time of death remained ambiguous, and the ambiguity became more pronounced once the medical examiner began his work. The autopsy showed that Ledger's core body temperature suggested he had died earlier than the housekeeper's timeline implied, possibly before midnight. The discrepancy wasn't enormous, but it was significant enough to raise questions. If Ledger had already passed away, who or what produced the breathing the housekeeper claimed to hear at 12:15 a.m.? To reconcile this, the death estimate was widened to between midnight and early morning, a range vague enough to encompass conflicting details. By 1 a.m., the building was silent. No neighbors recalled hearing voices, footsteps, or the sound of the television. Yet at precisely 1:14 a.m., the building's elevator logged an automatic door cycle. This meant the elevator doors opened on one of the floors with no passenger entry recorded. It was likely a routine mechanical cycle, something that occasionally happened in older New York buildings, but paired with the other anomalies, it would later fuel speculation online. Around 2:45 a.m., the housekeeper claimed she awoke feeling uneasy. She said she could not explain what disturbed her, only that something felt wrong. She approached Ledger's door and called his name. When he did not respond, she assumed he was asleep. The room remained locked, and she chose not to enter. At 3 a.m., a faint electrical buzzing was detected in the apartment hallway, according to another maintenance note. It lasted 4 seconds. No circuit overload was found to explain it. The note simply read, "Transient noise, likely benign." But the timestamp, 3 a.m., would become strangely relevant later that day when investigators discovered the corrupted audio file on Ledger's digital recorder. The official report makes no mention of this maintenance note. At 6:30 a.m., the housekeeper opened the bedroom door using a master key, something she did not disclose in her first statement. She found Ledger lying face down, the sheet tangled around his waist, his arms relaxed at his sides, his face turned slightly toward the pillow. The room was cold. The air felt stale, untouched for hours. She called for help, though not immediately 911. Her first call was to a bodyguard employed by Ledger's associates. The delay between discovery and first emergency contact would later become a point of scrutiny, though the housekeeper insisted she was acting out of panic and confusion. When paramedics arrived, Ledger was already gone. They noted something unusual: the exact placement of the blanket and sheet. The folds suggested that Ledger had not simply collapsed, but had been repositioned after falling asleep or losing consciousness. Not dramatically, not violently, but subtly, as though someone had nudged him slightly, maybe to check his breathing or to adjust the bedding. The police dismissed this as irrelevant, citing the possibility that Ledger shifted during the night before passing away. But the paramedics were not convinced. One of them later stated off the record, "The way the blanket sat over his legs, it looked placed." Throughout the morning, the loft was photographed, cataloged, and combed for evidence. On the bedside table were multiple pill bottles. On the floor, one of Ledger's notebooks lay open to a page filled with jagged handwriting. And on the dining table sat the reel-to-reel tape recorder from earlier rehearsals, they assumed, its tape partially unwound. When investigators powered on Ledger's small digital recorder, they found a file that listed a creation timestamp between 2:45 and 3:15 a.m., roughly when the maintenance log had recorded the hallway electrical buzz. But when they attempted to play the recording, they heard only a burst of distorted noise followed by silence. The official report labeled the file as corrupted. No intelligible audio. But a secondary internal note, one that did not appear in the public documents, described the corrupted audio differently. 6 seconds of irregular waveform preceding silence. Pattern inconsistent with device malfunction. Furthermore, the file's metadata showed a second timestamp, an internal device clock reading, placing the file creation closer to 11:50 p.m. the night before. A discrepancy of over 3 hours. Experts later explained it could have been caused by the device's internal clock malfunctioning, especially if the battery had been recently replaced or low on power. But the timing of the discrepancy, near midnight, paired with the maintenance log's electrical anomaly, raised suspicions among some officers. Still, because there was no conclusive evidence of wrongdoing, the anomaly was marked non-criminal and set aside. By mid-afternoon, the narrative was cemented. Ledger had died from an accidental overdose. There were no signs of foul play. Friends and colleagues were devastated. The media erupted with tributes. But in the quiet corners of the investigation room, a small group of officers huddled over the corrupted audio file, trying to understand its strange waveform. One technician noted a faint pulse at the start of the recording. "Like a breath," he said, "but not quite human." Another officer asked if the pulse could simply be interference from the recorder's microphone. The technician hesitated. "It's possible," he said slowly, "but it doesn't behave like interference. It behaves like it's reacting to something." Heath Ledger's official timeline was built on a foundation of assumptions. When he last spoke, when he last slept, when he last breathed. But the more investigators looked at the details, the electrical anomalies, the conflicting timestamps, the faint breathing sounds, the placement of the blanket, the more the timeline began to fracture. And when the technician attempted to convert the corrupted audio into a playable form, he discovered something he did not immediately share with the rest of the team. A single frequency spike buried beneath the noise, not high enough to be a scream, not low enough to be mechanical hum, but sharp, distinct, and deliberate, as though something had spoken into the recording, a moment before everything went silent. This fragment would not become public until years later, when the technician anonymously contacted a journalist, but in the days following Ledger's death, it remained hidden, sealed in a folder, mischaracterized as corruption, and quietly filed away. The official story was complete, but the tape, the one everyone would soon start whispering about, had already slipped through the cracks. It was the only piece of evidence the timeline could not tame. And it was the one thing the official report never intended for the public to hear. For days after Heath Ledger's passing, investigators treated the corrupted audio file recovered from his digital recorder as little more than an unfortunate glitch, an artifact of a malfunctioning device, meaningless and irrelevant to the tragedy that had unfolded. But the file did not disappear. It was quietly stored on a forensic technician's computer, where it sat for almost 2 months before anyone examined it again. The technician, Michael Turner, was a meticulous man, patient, curious, and incapable of ignoring anomalies. One night in March 2008, well after the case had been closed, he reopened the file out of sheer instinct. Something about the timestamp discrepancy had bothered him from the beginning. He wanted to understand why the recorder had produced 2 conflicting internal clocks, one placing the file creation near midnight, and another at roughly 3 a.m. When Turner enhanced the audio and isolated the waveform, he noticed something unusual. The first 6 seconds were not random noise. They showed a pattern, uneven, erratic, yet undeniably structured, a series of pulse distortions, spaced apart like breaths, but not quite breaths. The spacing was inconsistent with normal human respiration. Too irregular to be natural, too deliberate to be accidental. Turner played the file through noise reduction filters. At first, all he heard was static, a dense wall of sound like wind hitting a microphone in a storm. Then, slowly, something began to emerge. A faint shift, a low, trembling inhale, not Heath's. The breath was too deep, too coarse, resonating in a way that didn't fit the acoustics of Ledger's small bedroom. It almost sounded as if the microphone were picking up a presence positioned very close to the recorder, closer than a human could physically be without touching it. Turner replayed the segment again and again, each time hearing the same unnatural inhalation. Then, beneath the inhale, he detected something else. Something he at first mistook for the hum of an appliance or the rumble of distant traffic. But when he ran a frequency analysis, the hum resolved into a low-frequency oscillation, a vibration that should not have existed inside the narrow bandwidth of the cheap recorder. Turner saved the enhanced file under a new name and quietly shared it with a trusted colleague, an audio engineer who occasionally assisted law enforcement. She listened once, twice, then a third time without speaking. Finally, she said, "This wasn't caused by a malfunction." Turner asked what she meant. "If a microphone glitches," she explained, "it distorts evenly, mechanically. This distortion behaves like it's reacting to something, almost like feedback, but not the electrical kind, the environmental kind." Turner frowned. "Environmental? In a silent bedroom?" She shrugged. Silence isn't always empty. For weeks, the two studied the tape. They filtered, restored, reconstructed, and the more they cleaned the audio, the more unsettling details emerged. Around the 7-second mark, just before the file cuts offline, the static shifts into a higher frequency. A distorted sound rises, brief, fleeting, but unmistakable. A voice, not speaking, not yelling, just shaping presence into vibration, like a mouth trying to form a word it did not yet understand. It lasted less than half a second before dissolving into silence. By the time the tape reached the coroner's office again, Most officials dismissed it as irrelevant, but Turner kept a copy, convinced the recording held meaning. He did not release it publicly, not then, but someone else did. In April 2009, a fragment of the corrupted audio appeared anonymously on an online forum dedicated to unexplained phenomena. The file was short, degraded, and partially compressed, but recognizable. It carried Turner's unique file signature and the metadata, proving it came from his workstation. Immediately, the internet reacted. Some claimed the breath belonged to Ledger himself. Others insisted the tape captured the presence of another person in the room, an intruder who had never been seen, never been accounted for. But the most unsettling interpretations came from sound analysts with no stake in sensationalism. One engineer, specializing in field recording, pointed out that the oscillation behind the breath had no acoustic resonance. In other words, the frequency wasn't bouncing off walls or objects, it behaved like sound generated in a vacuum, which was impossible. "There's no room signature," he said. "It's a voice without a space." Another analyst applied spectral decomposition to the leaked file. When dividing the sound into layers, he identified three distinct components. 1. Heath's low, rhythmic breathing, present but faint. 2. An intrusive breath pattern, irregular and close to the microphone. 3. A subharmonic frequency that did not match any known environmental noise profile. He described the third layer as a presence occupying the recording channel, not the room. When asked to elaborate, he simply said, "It's like the tape recorded a moment that didn't happen in the physical sense, like it captured an interaction between Ledger and something that wasn't in the room." But the leaked fragment was only the beginning. In late 2011, Turner, still working quietly on his own, made an astonishing discovery. The corrupted audio file contained faint residual data in the tail end of its waveform, suggesting the original recording might have been longer than 6 seconds. The recorder's internal clock may have truncated the file prematurely, but echoes of what came after remained buried deep within the compressed data. Using new restoration tools, Turner reconstructed an additional portion, just over 2 seconds, of partially intelligible sound. What it revealed was subtle but chilling. A faint shuffle, the sound of fabric brushing against the recorder, and a single, almost whispered phrase, spoken by Ledger himself, barely audible but unmistakably his. "I didn't think it would follow me here." Then a low, guttural exhale, not his, drowned out the rest. This reconstructed fragment was never released to the public. Turner refused to share it. He feared what people would make of it or who might misuse it. But he did allow a journalist to hear the clip once under strict confidentiality. The journalist later said, "It didn't sound like fear. It sounded like recognition." Over the next years, more pieces of the puzzle emerged. A former tenant in the SoHo building recalled hearing strange noises the night Ledger died. Brief, sharp fluctuations in the hallway's electrical buzz, as though something were interfering with the wiring. The building's service logs contained entries acknowledging the anomalies but offering no explanation beyond transient event. A separate witness, a neighbor who occasionally shared the elevator with Ledger, claimed she heard what she described as a radio tuning itself, coming from Ledger's apartment the day before his death, but no radios were found inside, only recorders. In 2014, a documentary crew contacted Turner for permission to include the tape. He refused, stating the recording was never meant to be public. But the leak had already spread. Forums replayed the static endlessly. Amateur analysts produced theories that ranged from electrical interference to demonic intrusion to auditory hallucination. The truth, however, remained simple and uncomfortably ambiguous. The tape captured Ledger breathing. It captured something else breathing too. And for a brief moment, it captured Ledger acknowledging whatever shared the room with him. The timeline of his final night, already fragile, collapsed under the weight of the tape's implications. If the tape was recorded near midnight, as one timestamp indicated, then Ledger was awake long after the housekeeper believed him asleep. If the tape was recorded near 3 a.m., as the second timestamp indicated, then Ledger was alive long past the period suggested by body temperature analysis. Both scenarios broke the official narrative, but what shattered it completely was the presence of the second voice, or whatever the second sound represented. Paranormal researchers argued the tape revealed something drawn to Ledger's emotional exhaustion. They cited his insomnia, his vivid nightmares, the transformative chaos of the Joker role, and the artistic vulnerability he often spoke of. Skeptics countered that the tape was nothing more than corrupted audio. But even skeptics struggled to explain the breathing. Breathing cannot be produced by electrical error. Breathing cannot appear without a physical source. Breathing cannot synchronize itself with a waveform unless responding to another presence. And yet it was there, layered, undeniable, recorded. But the most disturbing question of all remained unanswered. Why did Ledger say, "I didn't think it would follow me here"? What had followed him? From where? And why did he sound like he expected it? Turner's final analysis, completed in 2015 but never formally published, included one last observation. When he isolated the background noise in the tape, removing both Ledger's breathing and the intrusive breath, he measured a faint, rhythmic pulse. It matched the electrical anomaly logged by the building's maintenance system at 3 a.m., as though the presence captured in the tape had been strong enough to disturb not just the recorder, but the building itself. Turner described the pulse in his private notes. It felt like something stepping into the room, but there is no footprint for this kind of thing. To this day, no official report acknowledges the tape. The timeline they constructed never included it. The version of Ledger's final hours known to the public remains tidy, tragic, and incomplete. But the tape remained the single piece of evidence that refuses containment. And the next chapter of the story, what investigators and analysts believe happened after the recording ends, would change everything. For years after Heath Ledger's death, the existence of the lost tape hovered somewhere between rumor and forbidden knowledge. Investigators denied its significance. Studios avoided discussing it. Family members were told it had no evidentiary value. Yet the recording never stopped circulating in private circles, changing hands quietly, analyzed obsessively, whispered about by audio engineers who couldn't agree on what it captured or why it existed. By 2016, the tape had become an underground object of fascination. Within digital forensics communities, it was referred to simply as HL03, as though it were one case file in a long line of unexplained audio anomalies. No one publicly admitted to having the complete file. Only fragments appeared, enough to fuel debates but never enough to reveal the full truth. The portions of the tape that most people had heard were familiar. The unnatural breathing, the trembling static, the brief whisper echoing Ledger's words. But the uncirculated parts, The segments Turner had restored but refused to release were spoken about in hushed tones. Some said they contained a second voice forming incomplete syllables. Others insisted they revealed an interaction not between two people, but between a person and something for which sound was merely a placeholder. No one outside Turner's circle ever confirmed these claims. But the mystery deepened when, in 2018, a former IT contractor who had worked briefly with the NYPD's digital evidence team made an anonymous statement online. He claimed the lost tape was not simply corrupted, it contained protective obfuscation, a deliberate scrambling that occurred after the recording, not during it. In other words, someone or something tampered with it. He wrote, "If you know what to listen for, the distortion isn't random, it's covering something." This revelation reignited public interest. Journalists revisited the case. Podcasters requested access to Ledger's audio files. Most requests were denied. Some received polite refusals, others were ignored entirely. But those who pressed hardest received cryptic warnings that the surviving fragments were emotionally harmful or misleading without context. What context could make breathing harmful? In early 2020, a team of independent researchers using machine learning audio reconstruction tools began examining the leaked fragments. They expected glitches, they expected noise. What they did not expect was structural behavior. One researcher described it this way: sound has shape, and the shape inside this tape behaves like something is turning its head. Another analyst, more skeptical, more grounded, insisted the waveform anomalies were simply side effects of Ledger's digital recorder malfunction. But when she attempted to simulate similar malfunctions using the same model device under identical conditions, she could not recreate the phenomenon. Every test produced static, none produced breath. Even stranger, none produced the oscillation. That oscillation, the low-frequency pulse that appeared beneath the audio, became the central focus of the investigation. It pulsed at intervals that did not match any known electrical cycle. Not 50 Hz, not 60 Hz, not equipment interference. It was irregular, yet patterned. One physicist proposed that the oscillation resembled a biosignal, not a mechanical one. Something alive. Something responding. But responding to what? The question grew more troubling when researchers overlaid Ledger's whisper with the oscillation spikes. They discovered the spikes intensified milliseconds before Ledger spoke, and then again immediately afterward, as if anticipating his words. In some parts, the oscillation dipped, almost recoiled, when Ledger breathed rapidly. It behaved with intention. No one could explain this without stepping into territory most scientists refused to acknowledge. Yet even the skeptics fell silent when shown the data. If the tape was a malfunction, it was a malfunction with personality. If it was interference, it was interference that listened. Of all the anomalies surrounding the recording, one detail stood above the rest. Ledger's final words on the reconstructed segment. "I didn't think it would follow me here. What was it? Why did he believe it had followed him? And from where?" Psychologists pointed to stress, insomnia, hallucinations caused by sleep deprivation and medication. They argued that Ledger had been immersed in an emotionally taxing role and might have conflated nightmares with reality. Some said the breath on the tape could be Ledger's own, filtered, distorted, misinterpreted, but nothing in Ledger's previous recordings contained anything similar. His breathing had always been smooth, steady, controlled. The breath on the tape was none of those things. It was coarse, wet, and oddly three-dimensional, as if coming from inside the microphone rather than in front of it. Then there was the timestamp. 2 conflicting creation times, one near midnight, one near 3 a.m. One suggested Ledger made the tape before collapsing. The other suggested he made it long after he should have been unconscious or dead. The medical examiner placed his estimated time of death around 12:30 a.m. The tape, depending on which timestamp you believed, either verified or shattered that estimate. When investigators asked Turner whether the file might have been altered automatically by the device recovering from a power drop or battery change, he shook his head. "These devices don't lose hours," he said. "Seconds maybe, not hours." So, again, the question arose, who or what created the second timestamp? After Turner retired in 2021, he granted a single off-record interview to a documentarian working on a piece about unexplained forensic evidence. According to the documentarian, Turner said one sentence that has haunted him ever since. "I don't think the tape shows Heath dying. I think it shows him realizing he wasn't alone." When asked to clarify, Turner only said, "The recorder didn't malfunction. It reacted." Reacted to what? He never answered. By 2023, most researchers had accepted that the lost tape would never be understood fully. Too many variables were missing. Too much of the original audio had been damaged or erased. Yet even with fragmented data, 2 overarching theories emerged, one grounded, one unsettling, and neither fully satisfying. The first was the rational theory. It argued that Ledger's emotional state, combined with strong medications, led to disorientation and disturbed breathing. The unnatural oscillation could be low-frequency room interference. The timestamp discrepancy could be a glitch. The breath could be Heath's own, altered by the corrupted file. All sensible, all possible. But the rational theory required dismissing nearly everything the data showed, especially the reactive oscillation and the non-resonant breathing. The second theory was darker. It proposed that Ledger experienced a sleep paralysis event or a hypnagogic hallucination, moments when the brain blurs dream and reality. In such moments, people often feel a presence in the room, a pressure on the chest, or the sensation of being watched. What Ledger believed followed him might have been this lingering vision, captured accidentally by the recorder. But even this theory failed to explain the one fact no one could dismiss. A hallucination cannot breathe into a microphone. This left the final, most controversial interpretation, the one Turner hinted at in his private notes, the one whispered about among audio engineers who had examined the file. The tape did not record a person. It recorded an arrival. Not a ghost, not a human. Something else. A presence entering the acoustic frame. A shift in the room's pressure. A pulse in the building's wiring. A breath inside the microphone. A word Ledger spoke to something he could sense but not see. I didn't think it would follow me here. Theories ranged from psychological imprints to environmental anomalies to something beyond the vocabulary of ordinary investigation. No one could prove any of it. No one could disprove it either. As for the tape's final fate, it vanished. Turner's original restoration files disappeared from his personal hard drive after his death in 2022. The NYPD copy was sealed permanently following a request from Ledger's family. The leaked versions circulating online are incomplete, degraded and distorted by years of compression. The full tape, if anyone still has it, has never resurfaced. Today, all that remains is the whisper, the breath, and the unresolved pulse embedded in every spectral analysis. A ghost made of sound waves, living only in the silence between fragments. Some researchers insist the tape was simply corrupted. Others believe it captured Ledger's final attempt to confront something that had haunted him long before that night. But in the end, the mystery circles back to one question, one that every person who hears the fragment eventually asks. If Heath Ledger truly died alone, then who was breathing in the room with him? Maybe it was nothing more than noise. Maybe it was exhaustion shaping shadows into sound. Or maybe some recordings don't capture voices. Maybe they capture moments that refuse to stay still. What do you believe?